I wanted to announce a scholarship, which one of our members gives out every year. My French is horrible, please excuse it. Jean-Pierre Boucher, is that how you say it? Has a scholarship in honor of his late wife, Susan, that he gives out every year to a deserving student who is interested in horticulture. This year, the award was to Lori Cox, who has been going to Foothill College and studying in their horticulture and landscape design program. She's especially deserving because she has gone through a number of personal issues, including her husband losing his job due to his health and also raising a son, but she still is pursuing a career in landscaping after having worked in high tech for many years. So she finds landscaping and gardening very soothing and a great therapy for life and keeping your attitude good. And we think the scholarship is going to a really wonderful person. We thank Jean-Pierre for continuing that tradition. So. And then we're going to actually try resurrecting another tradition this fall in that we are going to do a plant share. Of course, we're not going to be planting plants around, but I have photos of the plants that are going to be shared tonight. And I will get them up in just a second. And Leslie is going to allow me to share my screen, I believe.
There you go.
Oops. I need to get out of there. Wait a minute.
And Nancy's going to go first, is that correct?
Actually, I was going to go first, and I just, I'm not sharing my screen yet because I just made it full screen. Now I need to escape that before. Sorry. Sorry. I need to hit screen share before I hit that. Sorry. Give me half a second for this. Now I think I have the right place. And I will be ready to show our plant share. There we go.
It's good.
I think we're on, right? Okay, so the first plant is actually one in my yard that, are we getting feedback?
Go ahead.
Okay, it's a plant in my yard that I find particularly satisfying this time of year. It's a very old plant. They call them New York daisies or Michaelmas daisies. They used to be called Aster Novobelgi. Now they're called Symphyotrichum, I think you say, Novobelgi. And I'm not absolutely positive of the cultivar I have. The closest I could find was something called Lady in Blue, but it stays less than a foot high and it spreads out in a fairly nice compact clump. It's maybe 2 feet across. And I divided it a couple of times, so I have like 3 2-foot clumps, but it doesn't spread aggressively like the Symphyotrichum chiloense, which is our native aster. I find it really well behaved, and I give it once a week watering in my semi-heavy soil in Campbell. It does get quite hot here, and it seems to be pretty drought tolerant. And so I shear it back after it finishes blooming, and that's pretty much all I do to it. So it's a very satisfactory color plant for fall, and I recommend it. And if people have an interest, let me know, and I'll propagate some and have them at our plant table at some point in the future. So you can just email me at info@westernhort newyorkdaisies.org if you're interested. And now we're going to move on to our next presenter, which will be Nancy Schramm.
Do you want to take questions during these presentations? There is a question on the chat.
Okay, if there's a question, go ahead. Could you read it to me?
Yes. Is this drought tolerant? Ellen Frank asks.
Yeah, it gets about once a week watering in Campbell, which gets pretty hot. So I consider it fairly drought tolerant. Is that it?
Is it in full sun?
Yes. Any other questions? If not, then we will proceed to Nancy Schramm. And Nancy will have to unmute herself.
I did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You
Okay.
want to be spotlighted? We'll spotlight you.
You
Okay.
want to unmute your video, or start your video first in order for us to spot you.
There.
Here?
How's that?
Good, and you are here.
Okay. I thought it'd be fun to show these pictures of what I always knew of as Ergenia marittima, the sea squill, because somebody showed them at the CalHort meeting last month. And the one on the left, the flower was about 6 inches tall on August 20th. And the picture on the right, those are probably 5 feet tall on September 4th. So they grow pretty darn quick. They've broken out of their pots. That's just where the pots landed when I moved them here from Dad's nursery. So the plant that I thought I'd talk about tonight was Campanula. I have always loved Campanula. And the one on the bottom left, the Elatines elatinoides, I'm pretty sure the name is correct. It's what we used to call Isophila Mayi, but I got this name from Siskiyou Rare Plant Nursery some years ago. It blooms, it's blooming right now. I took those pictures just a few days ago. The leaves are kind of bluish and fuzzy. The one that is still called Isophila has green leaves, and the flowers are not quite as big and not quite as blue, but they're pretty close. The double Campanula above it, the cross Halogensis plana, blooms like crazy. The flowers are probably half the size of the star-shaped flowers below it. Both of these are great in hanging baskets. It's a fun time for Campanula. The one in the middle, Pink Octopus, always blooms for me at the end of August. And there's a woman at the Bonsai Club in Santa Rosa that has some really cool companion plants of that she has in the bonsai show. The Campanula postcharskiana blue waterfall only blooms a little bit this time of year, but I grew it one year, and spring through early summer, it's just covered, and it makes a really great hanging basket as well. The Pink Octopus was crossed by Terra Nova Nursery. They're the ones that did that one. And the Halogensis, I thought it was kind of interesting, came about in 1885 from either a person or a nursery called Hay Lodge. So on this shot, most of you know the Campanula garganica Dixon's Gold. That's another one that blooms earlier in the summer, but I often have a few blooms this time of year. Campanula rotundifolia, the one in the middle, has very small bells. They're very delicate. It's a wonderful rock garden plant. And the foliage is above it. And this is where you can see the roundish basal leaves early in the year. That's the only kinds of leaves you see. But then when it starts getting ready to bloom, you'll see those long, slender leaves on the left, the stem leaves. And then from now on, you won't see very many of the basal leaves until it is done blooming and it starts getting ready to kind of die down and go somewhat dormant during the winter time. I included, I believe this is Campanula, another Postcharskiana, but I'm not positive. And this one does a little bit of extra blooming at the end of summer as well. And then just in case you want some Campanulas that bloom in the spring, I took a picture of Campanula garganica at the San Francisco Flower and Garden Show several years ago. That's another great rock garden Campanula. Very low growing, lots of flowers. Peter Nix, that is above it, is another cross. And the flowers on that are a really lovely medium blue color, very large bells. And that is usually covered in flowers in the late spring, early summer. And the two on the right, I took pictures of in March. I don't think it was this year, but maybe the year before at Spring Trials. And it's Cochlearia folia, another great rock garden Campanula. And those are both selection names. Most Campanulas do well in just decent garden soil, average water. There's a few that are very invasive. Most of them are not. There's ground covers, hanging baskets. There's some Campanulas that will be blooming at about 6 or even 7 feet tall. And so it's just a genus that I really love.
That's great. Were there any questions for Nancy? Because I can't see the chat, so Leslie, if there are any questions, or John, if you'd let her know.
None have appeared on the chat.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
They're a plant I really love too, and I have several different ones in my front yard, but my pink octopus blooms much earlier. It's interesting. Mine finished probably by the end of July, and it was blooming in June, July, even May even. So
Mine are kind of pot bound, so I don't know if that, generally I would think that would make them bloom earlier.
Well, mine's in the ground.
Yeah.
And I got it from Sista's nursery a few years ago.
Okay.
So moving on, we are gonna let Judy talk about some plants here.
Judy, okay to put you on video?
Let's see.
Actually, I guess you'll have to do it. Doesn't let me do it too.
Okay. It said you stopped it. Let's see.
Sorry, that was, yeah, a user interface error. It wasn't my fault.
Okay. Well,
You're good.
I'm
We
good.
can hear you.
All right. So this is a plant that a lot of you have probably heard about from Annie's Annuals. This is the Asclepias physocarpus, or the balloon plant. And right now, the middle is what it looks like just last week. And you can see that it has the flowers. Oh, back up. There you go.
Sorry.
There's flowers on the left, which are also very pretty. And then you have the fruiting, I guess, or the part of the plant. And it is just covered with these kind of like balloon, like they're very soft. And as they mature, it'll dry and the seeds will come out. They're kind of like wispy, like a dandelion kind of whatever. And let's see, oh, I actually put notes down. So let's see. It's a milkweed, Its origin is South Africa. It is semi-deciduous, and mine blooms early in the summer with the pods forming in the mid to late summer. This gets full sun, and it gets low, I would say low water. It likes well-drained soil, and it doesn't like fertilizer or anything. But this one self-seeded itself at the base of the foundation wall to my house, and it gets winter heat because I have radiant floor heats, but it will self-seed, but not badly. I was really surprised to have it come up right in between the patio and the house, but it seems real happy there. So it's going very well. And last year, I think I had it, and I gave a lot of the blooming branches to a local florist, and he was thrilled because they're great in floral arrangements. Okay, next. I wanted to share some plants that I normally don't get to share. These bloom in the summertime when we don't meet. But this is Gloriosa superba, or Gloriosa superba rothschildiana. And the common name is flame lily, glory lily. It's not in the lily family, it's the Colchiaceae family. And it's the national flower of Zimbabwe. It's an herbaceous tropical perennial that climbs, and oh, you can see maybe on the left picture in the upper right corner, there are little tendrils at the end of the leaves, and it tends to kind of grab on with those little tendrils. So the plant can grow to 9 feet, but mine was about 4 to 5 feet in a 1-gallon pot with a supporting post there you see. Let's see, it's deciduous, blooms in the summer, full sun. I mean, it's in the hottest part of my yard, gets regular water. It is a zone 10 to 11 plant, but you can grow it in our zone, my zone 9, if you mulch it in the wintertime, it says. So my plant came from the San Francisco Botanic Garden nursery. It had languished there where I worked with the bulbs for years. So when we were closing up the nursery, I brought it home, and to my surprise, this summer, it bloomed for me. And I'd be curious to know if anyone else is growing it. There you go. Okay. So that's a summer bloomer. It bloomed in, I would say July for me. It had several blooms. Okay, next. This is another plant that bloomed for me in the summertime, which I never have a chance to bring it to Western Hort. This is Neomerica cerulea, and this is a bulb. Its common name is walking iris, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And I've heard it called the apostle plant because it doesn't bloom until it has like about 12 or more leaves. It's a hardy bulb from Brazil, and it blooms for about 6 weeks in the summertime. Each flower only lasts 1 day, unfortunately, but it does bloom in flushes, so you'll get multiple flowers over the 6-week period. It grows in part shade in my garden. It likes morning sun. I don't think it would be as happy with afternoon sun. And it needs average water to start, but supposedly when it's established, it doesn't need as much water. The reason it's called the walking iris is that after the inflorescences kind of wilt and start thinking about setting seed, you'll see offsets, and they appear at the top of the spent stems. And they get big. They can get up to maybe 10 inches maybe. So they get pretty heavy there, and then that kind of bends the stem down. And then oftentimes that offset is on the ground, and that's how it gets the name walking iris. I recently purchased a Neomerica gracilis, which is similar in flower, but it's got white petals, and we'll see how it does. It had several offsets, which I potted up for Western Hort, and hopefully be able to offer them for sale in the future. Okay, and next. Last but not least, I had to share these because I think they are so cute. These are micro tomatoes, and the one on the left is called House, and the one on the right is called, it's not Orange Hut. What did I put down? Orange Hat.
I'm sorry, my typo, I'm sorry.
Okay. I first saw them in Chile last year growing in a 5 or 6 inch deep window box, and they were covered with tomatoes. So anyway, I grew 2 varieties. The one on the left is a red tomato, and thanks to Katie Wong for sharing her seeds, which she got from J.L. Hudson Seeds in La Honda. The one on the right is a more upright grower, and the seeds are from Baker Creek. Let's see, the one house, the one on the left, I guess the origin was somebody's grandmother brought it from Russia. It's very red, it's very early and productive, but as you can see from that stick there, none of them grew more than 7 inches tall. The flavor is good on house. It can be cut back and grown indoors in the winter. The person who gave the seed to J.L. Hudson has 2 plants that he's been growing on for 12 years. So he brings them in each winter. The orange hat is prolific. It's tiny, tiny but fruity tomatoes. I didn't think it was quite as good as house tomatoes, but maybe some people might have, I passed some of these around, so other people might have found them different in flavor. But this one never grew more than 6 inches tall. But I gave some to a friend with just a small patio in a pot. She was able to place it on a sunny ledge, and she's excited to grow tomatoes for the first time in her life. So if you have like a sunny spot, you know, even if it's not very large, you can grow these. This is a terracotta pot that's probably 13 inches wide and maybe wide, and then maybe 6 inches deep and 6 inches front to back. So it doesn't need a lot of room. And you can see they cover themselves with tomatoes. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Judy. And last but not least, we have Liz.
Oops, unable to start video. Okay. Okay, can the picture move over a little into the center?
It's centered on my screen, so I don't have any way to.
Okay, well, okay, never mind. Oh, well, okay, maybe it's just me. Okay, anyway, this is an Austrocylindro puntia subulata cristata. I've gotten into succulents in the last couple of years, and this one was given to me, and I think it's rather interesting. You can't deny that. It is in the where are my notes? Okay, it's in the subfamily of Opuntias, which are the prickly pears, the desert, and it's a desert cactus. You can grow it in the garden as well as in pots, and it's full sun, good drainage, and little water. So it's not unique in that sense with succulents, but it's unique in its shape, that's for sure. Oh, I'm sorry, it's common name, I should have said. It's the crested form of Eve's needle. Eve's needle is that Austrocylindro. Anyway, but this is the crested form, and cresting means it's a mutation that occurs as plants grow. It results in, they produce a lot of stems and branches, and then the plant kind of flattens out and creates a wide flat surface, as you can see in this one. So anyway, so that's what a crested plant is, and it's naturally occurring. So some things you can induce, but this is a naturally occurring mutation. Okay, that's it. Next. This is a ruffled echeveria. Yeah, it grows like, for scale, that's about 3 feet long, that the flower stalk on it. I can't see the plant itself. The sign is covering up a bit of my picture of the close-up of the plant. But anyway, you can see
that was all the picture what there was. I just reduced the size. But
oh, okay, okay. There it is. Okay, now I saw it. It's displaying differently on my screen. Never mind, we'll just move on. Yes, the lower, there was one plant of the photo of the plant itself close up, and then the other of the flowers close up. So that's fine. That's all I have on that one. Then there's a begonia. Oh, okay, well, we'll switch to the epilobiums, the California fuchsias. This is nothing new and exciting. I'm just celebrating the reliable summer blooms on into the fall of the California natives and the California fuchsia.
Oops, sorry.
This one, oops, okay. Okay, the California fuchsia, I have two of them. You can't tell very well, but one of them is more of a silver foliage and the other is more a gray-green, well, sorry, gray-green foliage, and then the other one is more green. These are go about 3 feet tall. And then the other shorter ones, Select Batole and Everett's Choice, that are low growing, if you want a more low growing. They do spread well, which is a diplomatic way of saying they're invasive, but I love them and they fit into my free-formed, undisciplined garden. Okay, next. These are, this is a buckwheat, the Eriogonum giganteum. And also the flower looks to me exactly the same. The Eriogonum giganteum that crossed with the Eriogonum fasciculatum that I had in my garden growing next to each other, they came up with this, it's a hybrid whose name I've forgotten. If anyone out there knows, when you combine giganteum with fasciculatum, it is a known hybrid. But the leaves, I can't see it in my screen, but the leaves of the giganteum is a little bit wider, and this one, the hybrid, is medium, and the fasciculatum is a narrow leaf. So is there one more picture?
No, I thought you were going to skip that one. So
Okay, yeah, that one, that's fine. Yeah, okay, so that's it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Were there any questions at all on? I think they got answered. There was one question to Nancy about some of the plants, and she does sell them at her nursery, which is Carmen's Nursery.
Correct. There are no new questions.
So I think we can move on then to our speaker. So we want to welcome Marlene Simon from UC Davis. She works in the Conservatory of Flowers there. And she's going to be talking about growing succulents and perennials together. So welcome, Marlene.
Hi, nice to hear me.
Not hearing the volume. Can you try that again?
Is everyone hearing me okay?
You're very quiet.
Okay, let's see if I can my earphones up. Hold on.
Right.
About that. Is that better?
No.
Okay, I'm going to go off of better.
I think so. Try say a little more.
Hello?
Yeah, there's a little bit of echo, but it's better.
Okay. Okay. The echo is probably my house. Turns out, I guess my earphones aren't working very well. So hopefully this works. Maybe I'll scoot a little bit closer. Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I get to do PowerPoint. So I work at the UC Davis Botanical Conservatory. So would normally say, raise your hand if you've been there. So hopefully some of you have been there. A lot of people think that we're the Arboretum. We're not Arboretum. If you know the quartz plant, you know the stinky flower that blooms every many years. I know the Conservatory of Flowers has one. Berkeley has one. We have several now, but we grow sort of the rare, unusual plants for classes and for people to come in and see. We consider ourselves sort of a living museum. And we have carnivorous plants, we have rare succulents, tropical plants, but basically everything that you can't grow outside or that you would normally see in a Mediterranean garden. We don't grow that, we grow inside, but we do have some outside beds. So I've been there 12 years. I graduated from UC Davis with a degree in horticulture, and I just do, I love it. It's my dream job, so every day it's different, sometimes good, sometimes bad. So I'm gonna start this, I'm gonna share the screen. Oh, looks like the host disabled participant screen sharing, so maybe we could get that back up.
Let me see what I can do about that. I actually do not know how to do that trivially. Sorry.
Okay.
Anyone wants to type in advice to the chat, that would be welcome. I will just make you a co-host. That's going to be the answer to that.
Okay. Let me know when I'll...
You should be good now.
Okay, there we go. Okay, So I'm gonna go there. Share that.
Yes.
All right. There we go. Everyone see?
Yes, beautiful.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so succulents in the garden, yeah, it's always sort of a lot of times you see people who just have a separate succulent garden or succulents in pots, but it's nice to combine because, as you know, a lot of succulents, they're grown for their interesting foliage. Of course, they're flowers as well, but it can be tricky because, as you know, a lot of succulents have completely different water needs. That's the main one. They don't all require full sun. That's sort of a misnomer. But usually it's the water that prevents people from mixing them in. So before I get too far ahead, here is my email, MWorkSimon. Actually, it's supposed to be at ucdavis.edu. I think I have it in another slide, so in advance. I have a podcast that I do. It's Flower Power Garden Hour. I don't know how many of you are into podcasts. I'm into murder podcasts, which there's my husband, so I listen to a lot of murder, true crime. I should say true crime podcasts. But it's on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and I have all different guests on there, from beekeeping to I'm going to release a plumeria one. So here's all my other info. If anyone does social media, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Marlene the Plant Lady, and that's my actual email, mrsimon@ucdavis.edu. I write for the SAC-B, and every other Sunday I'm on a local news station as a plant lady. So, okay, so I just want to sort of, with only an hour, I mean, that's how long I usually get to talk, but to me, I could talk forever about plants and any topic on plants. So what is a succulent? So when I'm giving tours at the conservatory, a lot of times people will come into our succulent room and they'll say, wow, look at all the cacti. Wrong, right? We know that most, I guess you could say all cacti are succulents, and not all succulents are cacti, right? So basically succulents, and this is my definition, I didn't even bother to look it up. This is just when people ask me on the fly. Any plant that stores a decent amount of moisture in its leaves or stems. You get a cacti, euphorbia, crassulas, sedums, even as I mentioned, plumerias. I consider plumeria almost a succulent, meaning, you know, there's moisture in those stems. And the reason, most of the time, it's because they're in areas of low water rainfall. Usually, that's not always the case. But that's what a succulent is. It just means it has a good amount of moisture that's stored in it. So when people say, how do I grow my succulents? That's a question that I tell them, I'm like, you know, I can't really answer unless I know, because there's succulents from all over the world. The ones that take are cold, ones that don't take are cold, ones that need to grow in only sand, and others that could take clay soil. So it's just a big category. So before we get into sort of the succulents for sure, I want to talk a little bit about propagation of succulents. Some of you have probably done that. But before we do that, I always like to make sure that people understand why we're doing cuttings the way that we're doing it. And if you guys hear loud noises, it's because I have 4 cats, and I think one of them is trying to do some destruction. So they may make a few appearances. Okay, so 2 major hormones. This is going to help you with pretty much all your, if you propagate anything. So the first one is going to be auxin, right? This is an important one. And that's produced at the active growing shoot, meristems, and young leaves. So meristems are found at the nodes. And you know that nodes are where the leaves grow out, branches grow out. The meristematic tissue is that undifferentiated cell material, meaning with either nature manipulating it or us manipulating it, meristematic tissue has the ability to convert into anything. Literally, it's stem cell tissue. It can become roots and stems just by sort of tweaking it a bit. So very important, found at the nodes, active growing part. So at that active growing part is a hormone called auxin. And it moves down with gravity. So auxin's moving down. And it moves in the phloem, which is the sugar transport tissue. If you ever have any aphids or mealybugs and you get that sticky stuff in, the reason is they're piercing into the phloem part. And that's why their poo is sugary, because they're literally pulling out the sugars from the phloem. Okay, and it's going to inhibit side growth. So if you think of a redwood with very upright, right? It doesn't branch off. That is very apically dominant, meaning the apical point is very dominant. All the auxin up there is moving down, and it's telling the side branches, don't grow, don't you grow. What would happen if you cut the top of that redwood tree, which you never want to do, right? It's just going to do side sprouts. So that's the whole point and purpose behind pinching, make a plant bushier, right? Is you're inhibiting that majority of that auxin production, and then that's triggering the plant to be able to side growth because you just remove that hormone that's keeping all that side growth in check. And it's going to promote root growth at low concentration. So not surprisingly, all your rooting hormone is a form of auxin. So you have your synthetic form. At the conservatory, if we're doing, or even at home, if we're doing spring cuttings, new growth, we don't use hormone anymore because new tip growth in spring, actively growing tissue is going to have the most auxin. So you really don't need to add synthetic auxin. If you're doing, say, a woody cutting that has less auxin in it, or, you know, as you move down a stem, you know, you're trying to get as much as you can out of one piece of stem. Yeah, you're probably going to want to add some rooting hormone just because your auxin's going to diminish as you go down that stem. But it moves with gravity, it forms roots, and then you have the opposite. You have cytokinin, and that's produced at the active growing root meristem. So even roots do have that active meristem, so it's produced in the root system, and it's going to travel towards the shoots and the leaves, and it moves in the xylem, the water, and it promotes. So it wants to do that side growth, right? So it wants to. It's what allows the plant to bush out, basically. And so if you, any of you grow orchids, and you get those little baby plants, and they're called kikis, because they form on like an old flower stalk. And you're like, why is this plant forming on an old flower stalk? Well, it just happens that there's some cytokinin in that flower stalk, and now it's producing baby plants, and they're called kikis. And so they actually sell something called kiki paste, which is basically cytokinin. So if you split a plant, you could add some cytokinin paste, and it will promote some side growth. We do it on some rare succulents, not so rare because we do sometimes sell some. But we will slice into the top of, say, a cactus and sort of split it open and add some kiki paste, force it to produce little baby plants when it normally wouldn't, or it's hard to get seeds. So you can sort of manipulate these plants. I just want the basis of the two major hormones, and this goes for any plant that you're growing. It's just a good idea. And this is why when we transplant, we don't prune and transplant at the same time, ideally, because if you were to prune the top, you cut off all the auxin producers. So you have no auxin moving down to produce roots. And then if you're transplanting it, you're disturbing all the roots, and you're cutting off all the cytokinin production, meaning all the little roots down there. So then you're not going to have any side growth. So basically you're putting this plant in complete limbo, and that's why sometimes when you do both, you prune and you transplant, you end up with this plant that just sits there and doesn't do anything. So normally what we do is we prune at the first notice of a new growth coming out, then we'll transplant it because we know that auxin is going to get down in there and feed those roots that have been damaged from transplanting. So I think this is why I don't even like to do, I'm not a big fan of like bare root, because I like my plant to be actively growing when I put it in the ground. So that's just some tips there. So if you have succulents, and of course, remember succulents range from, you know, these cacti to very leafy plants. When you do your cuttings, always leave your cuttings upright. And the reason for that is if you lay them sideways, that hormone auxin, it moves with gravity. So it actually pool on the bottom side of the cutting. We had this one giant cacti, probably about 4 feet tall, that we finally decided to pot up. And when we took it out of its pot, it had root knot nematodes, which, as you know, could be destructive to plants. So we made a giant cutting out of it. We just cut the root system off. Well, anytime you make a cutting of a succulent, you never want to put it directly into a soil media. They're very susceptible to rot, just the way their vascular system is. So you always want to let them callus. And that basically just means scab over. You can see here on this side, there's some scabs, and we let this one go so long, it looks like maybe some root forming. But you want to leave them upright so that auxin forms. And sometimes if you do like a section like this and like this, it's almost impossible to know which way's up. So we'll draw like arrows with a Sharpie just to point up until they're calloused. Sometimes, of course, if you're doing like echeverias or sedums, you don't even need to worry about callousing them. They're perfectly fine, but it's a good idea. Slower growing the plant, probably the better it is to let it callus and heal before you pot it up into a soil media, just so it doesn't rot out. And that goes with transplanting too. You never want to water succulent directly in after you transplant it. Let it just sit. So complete opposite of a leafy plant that way. So here's some cuttings that we just did this week at the conservatory. I just stuck them in a pot. They'll sit there, they'll callus. This is one that's been callusing for quite a while. Some of them we have there for way longer than I would like to admit before we pot them up. We usually pot them up in pumice or red lava, let them go to good root system, and then move them into our succulent mix. So this is an echinopsis. And this sort of gets into the hormones, what's happening here. So, you know, normally this would have a dome, but we wanted to force side growth. So we cut that apical tip off. And what happened all along here is new plants formed, right? Because we just removed that auxin that was holding the side growth in check. And now it sort of was like a free-for-all. Woohoo, yay, now we could just start producing. So then we'll just twist these little babies off with a pair of forceps. It's a really clean snip. Let them dry for a day or two and then pot them up. And this is going to callus over right here. So, and I'm going to show you, I'll just show you real quick why you could, I'm sure some of you have done leaf cuttings, even by accident. Here's an echeveria. So certain succulents you could do leaf cuttings of, a lot of sedums, echeverias, and then you just stick them in soil and little baby plantlets. So even though it's the stems that have that meristematic tissue in them that allows roots to form, certain leaves on certain plants also have a little bit of meristematic tissue that allow you to do leaf cutting. So if you've ever propagated African violets or begonias from leaves, those are some of the other plants that have that meristematic tissue. You know, and some you could try forever and ever and ever and never get a leaf. Sansevieria, the mother-in-law's tongue, you could do sections of the leaf. Gasteria, you could do a leaf and get baby plants from. All right, so why do some succulents have spines, right? Most people think, oh, it's for a plant defense, right? The animal doesn't want to eat it. Well, most things that attack plants, as you know, if you're a gardener, are very small insects, not necessarily the big herbivores out there. It's actually a cooling mechanism. So if you think about it, you have all these spines, and I say it's sort of like if you put your fingers together like this and you fan the air. If you open those fingers and you fan the air, you notice a very good increase of air movement and cooling here. So basically when the hot wind blows, it's like a radiator. It sort of cools that hot air off and pulls it away. So that's really what spines are used for. And on a cacti, that is the correct term, spines. On other plants, they're modified branches, like on euphorbias, they're modified branches. Sometimes they're just epidural outgrowths. Yeah. So this one here is a jumping cholla, and it gets its name because as animals brush by, sections of the stem break off and get stuck in the animal. And as the animal walks for a while, rolls around, those stem pieces will knock off. Well, the spines on a cacti are actually the modified leaves. And at the base of a leaf is the node. And at the base, in that node is that meristematic tissue. So when that node hits the ground, gravity allows that hormone auxin to pool. It's dark, there's soil, they'll start forming roots. So that's why you could take pretty much any section of a cacti and get it to root, because all those spines are leaves. And instinctually, you're like, oh, well, if I bury this section, it's going to grow into roots. So nature is just doing its own stem cuttings here. And then this is sometimes what happens. You're playing or propagating, you get stuck, and then you go to reach it, and then it just sticks in you. And then your student workers think it's funny and laugh at you. But So there's a picture online of a golfer who fell into one, and he's covered head to toe with giant pieces of jumping cholla. And the fire department standing around like, I don't know what to do. It just looked incredibly painful. So those are some easy propagation methods. Really, you just do them like you would, normal stem cuttings. Just keep in mind, some of them may not have leaves. Something else you may encounter, why do some succulents turn red? Here's an aloe. This aloe is on the south side of our conservatory. Now, I've lived in the Bay Area for 13 years, and then I've lived in Davis for about 20 years. There is quite a temperature difference. It's 100 degrees is completely common. And these aloes, we do not water at all in the summertime. And what they're doing is, one, their leaves are curling up, trying to protect that primary growth, and then they turn bright red. And what are they doing when they turn red? Well, they're masking their chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green pigment. It's responsible for photosynthesis. You need water, and you use water for photosynthesis. What does a drought-stricken hot plant not want to waste or use up when they have water to spare? Water, of course. So they're going to minimize photosynthesis. So they're going to mask their chlorophyll by allowing their anthocyanins, the red pigment, to show through more. So if this plant were to get some water, chances are it would convert right back to green. You can actually see some parts that are shaded. This leaf is shading this, and it's green. On the underside, it's still green. But the parts that's hitting the sun, it's masking itself. So some people love that. Your escheverias, your sedums, some of them turn really bright red if they get too much sun. Of course, you do run the risk of some of your succulents burning. They can burn in the sun. Like here, this is just, older leaf that burn here. But that's why they'll turn red. And it'll revert right back once they're okay. And it doesn't really hurt the plant. It's just, of course, stunting it because it's not actively photosynthesizing. So it's going to slow, of course, the growth of your plant. All right, so I want to get into now the incorporating of succulents into a perennial bed. And as I was saying, it's, of course, you have to have matching light, but usually it's the soil and the water that's the problem. You put in a succulent in with an area that's going to have more frequent irrigation, you run the risk of your succulent of dying. And I always tell people that for like native plants, it's not the summer drought that kills them. It's actually the winter standing water and poor drainage that kills them. If you've ever grown a ceanothus, it can do perfectly fine in the summertime with very little water. But if you get a heavy rain and you have heavy clay soils, it may die right away. So it's similar to succulents, incorporating them into your perennial bed is you need that really good drainage. So something that we've been using at the conservatory is red lava sand. So it's not red lava rock. It's red lava sand, or they call it fines, F-I-N-E-S, red lava fines, or even dust, and it's pulverized red lava. If you mix it into your clay soil, it's unlike compost. If you add compost, you raise your bed up, because raised beds in mounds is going to create better drainage. But what happens to compost over time, right? It's organic, it's going to break down. So pretty soon, you've seen yards where it has a nice mound, and then over time, it's just shrink, and pretty soon your succulents and your plants are going to be at that same level where the drainage isn't so good. So what we find is this red lava, since it's inorganic, it doesn't break down. So, and, you don't want to add sand. If you add sand to clay soil, you're just creating cement. This has a lot of little pockets in it that allows for the clay to not bind to it like sort of sand would bind with clay. So you mix it in, and you can see we mixed a lot in here. Then we actually also raised it. So this is primarily a succulent bed, but we also have bulbs, South African bulbs. And if with South African bulbs, that during the winter, they require really good drainage. In fact, or in the summer, I should say, they require really good drainage so they don't rot. So we're able to do that by incorporating this red lava. And you know, and also all these succulents here are able to survive because of the red lava. So it's just something that we really have added to most of our garden beds, like back over here even. So this is the UC Davis campus here. So they were building this building and some other buildings, and we sort of just grabbed upon anywhere we could plant. So we didn't have them plant like Euryalps and Nandina and, you know, Agapanthus. Not that there's anything wrong with those, right? But something a little more exciting, something a little more pizzazz. So this was that same bed, I think 2 years later. So the plants with red lava grow really fast because it's very pliable. Water drains faster through it. So then the roots are going to follow the water, right? So as you keep water, the water goes down, the roots are going to go down, the roots are going to stay cooler too. So cool roots make happier plants because they're not near the surface getting bombarded. Well, of course, if you add compost, that's great, but we haven't added any compost to this. We just rely on the roots going down, be insulated. And one nice thing that our students like is it's much easier to pull weeds from than just solid clay. Because it's nice and pliable. And we haven't lost the mound. The plants are it's still draining really well. So here's a yard of a volunteer from the conservatory. He's actually a world-renowned carnivorous plant expert who's moved on to succulents. So this is his yard in Woodland, which is north of Davis. And what he did is he removed some soil and then added red lava to what was left of his native soil, which would be heavy clay for this area. And then he did some raised areas. And his primary goal was to have various succulents, but he also wanted to incorporate some more perennials and, of course, native flowers like lupins, some grasses. He has a mallow tree back here. But you can see his primary goal is to have succulents within. I think that's a red bud right there. You do have to be careful, because this is his yard sort of the first year after he planted. He's like, oh, I'm just going to plant all these crazy succulents. Well, as I was mentioning, not all succulents tolerate all climates. And we do freeze here. We could even get into the high teens. If you're out in the country, I'm out in the country, and you know, low 20s isn't unusual here in the suburban area, but some of these succulents, you know, they're not going to want to hit the freezing point at all, so you're going to have to cover them. And I'm sure you all know you cover with sheets and not plastic, right? But I think he's slowly transitioned ones, or just said, hey, if they make it, they make it. You always also, something else with succulents is, and this is, you have to be careful with what's going to go in your perennial bed, because when you have leafy plants going into a frost, you want them well watered in because they handle a freeze and a frost better when they're well watered in. For a succulent, you want the opposite. You want them to be sort of more on the dry side because they're already so full of water. You have a freeze, the water literally could burst the cells and burst your plants. If you've ever had a mushy jade plant, it could be that it was just much water in there. So if you know there's a frost coming, sort of ease off on the watering of your succulents. Of course, that's something you have to consider when you're planting succulents in with your perennials. All right, so here's another succulent garden that has some more natives and then a little bit of South African bulbs in it. And I think that's a Palo Verde tree. And then you have some raised soil areas there. So, you know, bulbs are a good way to go. California natives are a good way to go because your watering is going to be slightly different time periods. Of course, succulents aren't going to look great all the time. So incorporating some of these native flowers and bulbs are going to give you interest year round. So I'm going to start going through some of them here and just talk about, so there's so many succulents that you can, of course, add into a perennial bed. But you're going to want to know the water requirement. Some of them that are so, you know, you have to give them some water and they die on you. You know, I mean, there's a succulent called Lithops. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. It looks like a bud. And that thing is so picky that you give it water the wrong time once and it could just mush out. Of course, you're not going to plant that in your garden, right? One, it's tiny, you're not going to be able to see it. So you have to be careful and do everything you can to minimize that, of course, with amending the soils and stuff. But some just ones that don't seem to really care but will give you interest to it is, of course, the Agave Americana variegata, Agave perii. I used to hate this plant here because I fell into it once, and unlike cacti spines, you know, the pokey things, the ends of the leaves, they don't come off. So they basically just goes right down to the bone. Agave perii needs almost no water. I got a big one digging up from someone's yard who didn't want it. And I'm like, sure, I'll take it, but I'm not ready for it. So we literally pushed it off the tailgate of a truck. It stayed in this area in my yard for, I think, 3 years, not potted up. And I'm sure some of the roots made it into the soil, but every day I'd go out and be like, oh, still alive, yep, still alive, there it is. They can become almost invasive though. They could just send out little babies like crazy. So you do want to be careful because they'll get big and then they'll send out babies and they can almost take over a whole entire area. And then of course, if you have kids or puppies, you know, it can be a little dangerous and hazardous, but man, absolutely gorgeous. If you've ever seen when the leaves are stuck together before they open, it leaves that imprint on the leaf. Really pretty. So here's a cluster at the Arboretum of them. So they have it with bull bean, and I think they have that with Calandrinia. Maybe that's red hot pokers that are sort of that borderline succulents, you know, drought tolerant. So where I'm at in Davis, you're not really going to plant a garden unless it's drought tolerant. We don't have the benefits of being able to plant things that need a lot of water. I guess you can, but then the sun's going to cook it. So a lot of these succulents are going to go with your Mediterranean plants or your native plants, ones that are maybe a step above of water needs, or almost equal, really. So it's not like you're going to put these in an area where you need, I don't know, something like with Angel's Wand or something that needs a lot of water. That would be tough. All right, so I'm going to start with, go on to aloes, because we have a lot of them at the conservatory. We got a grant to hybridize and to find ones that do great in yards. And so they're great because they bloom late winter, January, and when there's no other flowers blooming, they are great for hummingbirds. So if you want to feed hummingbirds in the winter, with flowers, there's not a lot blooming, but the hummingbird will go to most aloes. And this is the coral aloe, the striata, which is probably the easiest one to grow. It's nice because it has a smooth leaf, so it's not very pokey. It has a candelabra flower here, longish bloom period. But then this is Asparaxis mixed in, which is a bulb, so they're blooming at the exact same time. So I like the color combination here, and it's growing under, you know, a tree that's sucking up a lot of its moisture, so it can handle. So if you have a tree and you're looking to plant certain things, it's a good idea to do succulents that handle shade, and there are succulents that handle shade more than you realize, and aloe striata is one of them. Too much shade, you will see it leaning and reaching, but this one's dappled shade here. Aloe spinosissimum, this one was growing in the shade. So a lot of aloes, this one could handle more shade. It could handle full sun, but it could also do well in the shade. And yes, you may not have the blooms, but I've never noticed that really. Even aloes that are in a good majority of shade seem to bloom. So yeah, here's a old bloom spike right there. So, and this looks like it's with some coral bells even, and a leather, that's probably the leather fern there. So almost complete shade underneath a tree, but it adds a nice color to it and definitely texture. And you wouldn't think, oh, an aloe, dry shade, but it works. So here's just some different, you know, it's not just all boring colors of, you know, some people like, oh, aloe, everyone knows aloe vera, and I always have to tell people, no, that's actually not the showiest one. I think this one's maybe microstigma with the 2 different color spikes there. So I think this was in January or February. So hummingbirds just go crazy around that. Okay, so echeverries, of course. So this is when people say, you know, I have students and non-students too who are like, oh, I love succulents, they're so cute. And then I show them a picture of a big, giant, spiny euphorbia, and they're like, well, no, that's not what I mean. And this is what they mean, these cute, cute little echeverias. And of course, they're darling. And these ones are in pots, but for the most part, a lot of echeverias can go in the ground. Some are more cold sensitive, so you do have to be aware of that. But you know, some of them are red no matter what. Others will turn more red when they're stressed. Of course, if they're in too much sun, they may lose their color as well and revert back to just green. We have that Aeonium Schwarzkopf. That is that black color. Here in Davis, we never see it that color because it usually gets too much sun, even if people try to protect it, and it usually reverts back to just green. So here are just some, and the Echeveria elegans is probably the easiest one, the most rewarding in the garden. The one I think is probably the prettiest is the Echeveria Pearl von Nürnberg. It just has that iridescent purple to it, grows very fast. And a little small one is the Echeveria Derenbergii. Those ones probably are best bet for, and I know someone posted the Echeveria Ruffles. That was in a pot. It probably would do okay in the Bay Area in the ground. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But Echeverias, I would always give a little bit of afternoon shade in a really hot climate, just because they can discolor and lose some of their color in the afternoon sun. So, and you know, they just spread, feeling nice in front of a border, even, you know, creeping through some low plants. Echeveria imbricata is another nice one. Nice tight rose clusters here. That's in with, I think this is up in Mendocino. So of course, almost everything grows in Mendocino. Perfect climate, really. Of course, Bay Area is similar too. Everyone probably knows this, but I have to throw it in there because it's an absolutely gorgeous one, Sedum Autumn Joy. And I'm not sure if they have moved it out of Sedum. I think they have, not 100% sure. This one, you can't really go wrong. It's almost like cheating calling it a succulent, but it's a sedum and it's a succulent. It gets nice and tall. These nice, when I say tall, probably about 3 feet tall. These pink flowers will stay on and turns like bronze. So you have a long interest as far as color goes. It's attractive. Bees like it. I believe butterflies like it too. So it's a great pollinator. With a long bloom, low water, so you can mix it in with your Mediterranean beds, dies down, no fuss. There's a variegated one as well I have in my garden, so the foliage then is variegated as well, so it just adds extra interest with. Here's another sedum that gets a little bit bigger. So some of these succulents, you know, like the cute succulents, can get lost in a garden unless you have a very tidy, controlled garden, I guess you could say. So this sedum I like because it's taller. It will form a nice mound, a big wide mass about, you know, maybe 3 feet, and then it'll get maybe 18 inches tall. So it actually is going to cover a bigger area. But of course, there's sedums that are going to creep along the ground. It's just sometimes I'm like, where'd they go? You know, because you know, my garden becomes a big mess sometimes, all the time. So yeah, I just like this one. I think it's called Palmer sedum. I love this sedum, Caudicola, because of these blooms. I just did an installation at a local restaurant in Winters, and they made these really long troughs, like 20-foot long troughs. And I wanted something that was going to hang over a little bit and have a really nice like color besides orange, because a lot of succulents have orange color flowers. This has this beautiful, I wouldn't even know what you call that, purpley color. So it does well in the ground. I wouldn't put it in just solid clay. I wouldn't be surprised if it could make it though if it was in solid clay, but mixed in front of your border, lower plants would do well. Okay, Echinopsis. This is a true cacti. Absolutely amazing color. This one here is called a barber pole because of the stripes. This picture doesn't really do it justice. But they come in all these different colors here. I mean, it's just when they bloom, they go through about 2 or 3 bloom spells a year. Of course, the flowers only last a night, like most cacti, but they're super showy. So if you plant them in masses, and they're great. And this one does great in dry shade. So if it's that spot again, if you have you know, under a tree and you've planted, you know, coral bells or helleborus, mahonia, things that you don't need to water a lot, add echinopsis. I know in the hot area here, it's almost a must to plant these in dry shade. We have these in pots as our mother plants, and they get shaded in the summertime. Bay Area, you could probably do full sun. It'll be perfectly fine, but I still think you could put in a little bit of shade. It'll be okay. So this is what happens when you put it in full sun. You can see the discoloration here. Isn't it funny how the ribs, the part that get hit by the sun the most, turn that red? I find that fascinating. So you could see that they're just spreading out. And so they can't handle full sun. It's just a little bit more stress for them, but beautiful flowers. So Opuntia, I know someone showed the cylindrical Opuntia, the crested one. You can actually grow standard Opuntia if you want. This is a creepy crawly one. This is at the Arboretum, but it's growing in their perennial bed, in their store garden with, you know, so it's a drought tolerant garden, you know, but they have abutilons there. Roses are planted nearby, but in it, they have this beautiful Opuntia. Of course, you have to control it, but you know, the fruits are absolutely gorgeous, nice interest. So you don't need to think of these cacti and these plants as solely a succulent garden type thing. This adds incredible interest to a perennial bed where you think, oh, I can't grow that here and I really want to grow one, or I have to find a corner off where. No, this is getting standard water. So it's doing fine. Of course, good drainage is key. Hesperaloe parvifolia, this one in mass, I recommend mass. This one's by itself here. But in masses, these tall flower spikes that are probably about 6 feet tall. Hummingbirds love these as well. And long bloom period. Plant itself is not super showy in my opinion, but if you were to just do a whole hedge of these or maybe ring your garden, they do fine with standard garden water. But long bloom period, pretty fast growing, really no fuss. You just cut these stalks back and really that is it. Let's see here. So this Plectranthus here, and I don't know why the highlight didn't come up in this picture. Isn't the best picture. I don't know why I didn't go back and pick another one. I don't know, but I love these flowers. So this is, if you know Plectranthus, a lot of times they're grown as house plants and they're succulents. So this is an example of a house plant that can be succulent, but this one takes full sun. I think its common name is skunk plant because it smells like skunk. Some students will walk by and say, it smells like pot, but to me it smells like skunk. Fast growing ground cover. So if you want a ground cover with lots of pretty flowers, it can take over. How I control this is I literally will just grab handfuls of it and rip it out because it does not care. You know, if you know someone with it, you'll have it forever because it just takes by cutting super easy. But it's a really nice, interesting full sun ground cover that I would try for an area that you just want to cover and want to spread and not water. We barely water it and it's happy. So sun plant, Plectranthus neochilus. Euphorbias, Euphorbia atropurpurea. So euphorbias are found all over the world. And that's why you have, you know, so they're an old family. You have leafy ones, and then you have ones that are very spiny. So leafy, you know, poinsettia, that's from Mexico. A lot are from South Africa. There's the Euphorbia californica. So there's a native California one. I always know that the flowers smell like honey urine. You get the first smell is honey, and then it's followed by a urine smell. So I just know it is that. But this Euphorbia atropurpurea is probably about 6 feet tall, 4 feet wide. It's big, and it's on the south side of the conservatory in blazing, blazing hot sun. But I've seen it growing within other garden plants. So it's one of those that could take no water to a pretty good amount of garden water. And it has the really nice bracts that give that nice maroon color. You could prune it all the way down if you want. We never prune it. Just a little bit of tidied up, but so it's a leafy succulent. So in your perennial bed, it could give the illusion of still being leafy but it is a succulent, easy. As you know, euphorbia sap could be pretty caustic. So anytime you plant a euphorbia, just, wear gloves. That sap is bad. As this right here, this is probably this euphorbia, I always say Meissonites. I was working at a nursery and I was propagating this, and I never wear gloves for anything, and sap was getting all over me. And the next day I woke up and I had blisters on me this big from this plant. So, there's different degrees of, sensitivity to euphorbia sap, and there's different euphorbias that are, can be quite toxic. So you never want to get in your eye. I've also had it where I couldn't wear my contacts for a full month because I got some sap in my eye, and anytime I tried to put my new contacts, it would just burn. There's stories of people going temporarily blind because it blisters your eye. So there was a professor who since retired a while ago, but he researched euphorbia. So we have quite a big euphorbia collection. So even when we're in the greenhouse pruning euphorbia, the sap hurts a lot. We'll go in, do it only in the morning, so it actually doesn't even vaporize as much. We'll go in, do some pruning, and then leave for the day out of that room because you smell it and it can actually get under goggles and into your eyes. I'm not going to scare anyone, but just be careful. These are interesting plant stories, I think. But yeah, there was a story about the bride who went to go snow in the mountain. It's a euphorbia that grows in the Midwest, or I think Kentucky, and she was in the hospital on her wedding day because she got it in her eye. Crassulas. This one's nice and showy here because it has this nice spike with the coral color. It's growing in with succulent, but I have seen this growing and within perennials. So the crassulas seem to not care. The jade plant is a crassula, and I've seen that within gardens. That one's a little frost sensitive, so that's why I don't recommend that one being planted in the garden. That's why a lot of times people grow them in pots because you move them closer to the house when there is a danger of frost. But this one tucked in amongst the plants, it's going to do just fine. This one here is a showstopper too. So I'd put this in front because it's not a very tall one, probably about 18 inches. It will lose this red color. I've had mine lose the red color in full sun. So if possible, dappled shade. If you have a tree nearby, give it a little dappled shade, afternoon shade, because it will revert to green. I mean, that's pretty, but it's the red, really, it's the red that you want. So it's funny, so some succulents will turn red in too much sun, and others, when that's part of their pigment, will lose that red. This one's called Red Pagoda. So just interesting. But crassulas tend to do okay with standard garden soil. Okay, so for those who want to try something really different and really out there, Stapelias, and I think they've changed it to Orbea variegata. These are fly pollinated. So these flowers are about 1 inch across. It's hard to tell. This is a creepy crawly ground cover you can see over here. It's actually in the milkweed family. So it goes to show you that you could have succulents in all different families. It's a low growing creeper. Flowers are about 1 inch on this one, and they're pollinated by flies. So that means it smells like poop or death, because that's what flies like. So yeah, flies are the #3 pollinators in the world. Go figure. But I always joke, people plant, bee gardens, they plant butterfly gardens, they plant hummingbird gardens. No one plants a fly garden because it would smell like poo or death, and no one would want to come over and have lunch in your garden. So this one does well. Even though it's from South Africa, it grows under the understories of trees. So if you have a tree with moderate to low water, even like a crepe myrtle or a redbud, if you plant this underneath, it's going to get some dappled shade. He'll creep along, and the flowers are just incredibly interesting. So, you know, it's protected from cold, doesn't want to be protected from cold, but we have it in Davis at the conservatory outside, and it just sort of creeps along. And then this one is the Gigantea. So this one has a bigger flower, and this one really smells like death. This is the one that if I go into the conservatory and I see something, I smell something dead, and I go, oh no, there's a dead rat somewhere. It's my kitty cats. Rat somewhere. And then I look and I'm like, oh good, it's just this flower blooming. We've actually had maggots being put on here by flies because they go to it, they think it's food for their larvae, their offspring, they lay the eggs, or even the live larvae, and they're on. So you can see it spreads quite a bit. Easy to take cuttings of, but that would be if you're looking for something completely different and interesting as a succulent. It's a fun plant. And then the last one, because I think I'm finishing up and we want to do some questions, the Cyphostema. So this is a grape relative, and this is out there. I'm not saying, you know, I would say only plant this if you know your soil's incredibly good draining on a mound. It has this calyx, big calyx here, meaning it's just a swollen stem that stores water. These leaves fall off completely in the winter. It handles our cold completely. We have a few of them at the conservatory outside, planted outside, and the leaves just basically melt off. We leave the leaves when they do that because, of course, it's protecting the stem a little bit. Yeah, it just makes it through every winter, so it does handle the cold. They get these fruits on them that look like grapes, but don't eat them. They're incredibly full of calcium oxalate, so it's almost like you're eating glass. I saw another garden had to put a sign, like, please don't eat the fruit. I did have a student come wandering in with a handful of them. He's like, what are these? I ate some of these. You just eat random fruits, and luckily he didn't have a reaction, but he said it did hurt. So this would be a crazy one if you really were like, I'm going to try a crazy succulent grow. But this gets big. It's probably about 3 feet, maybe 2 feet tall, 3 feet wide. But it just goes to show you that you could sort of push the boundaries of what you could put in your garden with your perennials if you get that soil amended. Drainage is key. Drainage is key with native plants. Drainage is key with Mediterranean plants. No plants want standing water. So it's always winter rains, right? Because you could control your irrigation in the summer. But even these plants, you know, may not want as much water as your Mediterranean plants. So then you have to pick the Mediterranean plants that are sort of going to go along, and then the succulents that are going to make it with those Mediterranean. So it's just sort of, you know, meshing the two together. And then if you wanted to try something really interesting, raise that soil up again. And create maybe even a bigger mound and have to, you know, so even better drainage. It's fun to experiment just with the different textures and colors and the different times of blooms for the hummingbirds. So there's so many more out there, and there's so many different varieties of each cultivars, you know, the sedums and the echeverries. And I didn't mention the sempervirens because they don't like our heat. So the cobweb ones, they don't work well for us, but in the Bay Area where it's cooler, I mean, you could have just those. When I see them, it's absolutely gorgeous in a perennial bed, but I don't have that on here because my experience is they just pretty much die out. So, and then the term succulent could be used very loosely as well. Tradescantias, they're purple heart Tradescantia. I'm like, should I put this in the slideshow? Like, is it a true succulent? Well, to me, it feels like a succulent. When I cut it, it sort of makes that noise. There's moisture in it. So, you know, that term succulent sort of used loosely. You could have your cacti and your euphorbia that really don't like a lot of water, to your Tradescantias that could handle a decent amount of water. So hopefully you guys have questions. Hopefully, I think it's 8:51. We have time for some questions, and I'm going to stop sharing this here. There. So, is there any questions?
Janet, you want to unmute yourself and read any questions?
I see one question here. Somebody asked what the cactus is on your very first page.
Actually, on the very first page.
I think it was before you even started, like the title page or before that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good question. Hold on. Whoops.
Okay.
I'm probably going to have to get back to you. Hold on. Let me see here.
Question.
It had kind of a peach colored flower. I believe.
Yeah. It's not an echinopsis. I'd have to get back to you on that. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me move this. Okay.
Yeah, if you just email Leslie, she can pass it along.
Okay. I'll do that. Any other questions?
Yes, the Pileus, how often does it flower?
Yes. So we have to have it in bloom a certain time for labs because what we grow it for is for basically comparing it to a cacti and a euphorbia. So we're showing convergent evolution where people think, then we show it, they're not all related because they're actually looking at flower morphology. So we have to have it blooming multiple times a year. I would say it puts on maybe, gosh, it blooms a lot. I would say it could put on 3 flushes of blooms a year. Oops, I think she muted herself.
I've had it for about 3 years and it's only bloomed once.
Highlight. So we have it in grow lights in the greenhouse.
Okay.
And then outside it gets dappled shade.
Okay.
So and even in the greenhouse, it blooms more than outside because I think the grow lights are really key. So if you could put it in bright light inside, put a grow light, then it's a tough one to grow in a pot too because it's one of those plants that the center will die out and then it wants to just keep creeping. So our problem with it is the center dies out. It's got pieces coming off and roots. I've tried big containers. That's why it's great in the ground because it could just creep along. That's the nature of it.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the euphorbias and that are very toxic, are they all toxic or just that variety?
They have differing levels. Like poinsettia, I think has the reputation of being very toxic. And as far as I know, that one's pretty mild. I wouldn't let your cat eat it and I wouldn't let your kid eat it and I wouldn't put it on my skin, but definitely there's different levels of toxicity. So yeah, it's like different levels.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one called poison bush where they actually put the sap on the ends of darts in certain tribes and they'll use it to kill fish and animals. So some are incredibly toxic.
And there's another question that was written in here. They asked whether, besides red lava, whether you can recommend another color, gray or gold colored gravel type.
So decomposed granite really wouldn't work. That would act as cement. You could try pumice, but that's white and it's more expensive. The nice thing about the red lava is it's relatively on par with compost, which is about $40 for a yard of it. If you don't like the color of it showing, what I would do is maybe incorporate it into the soil down below and then just save some soil and put it on top. But as far as another color, I could only think of maybe pumice to use that would sort of be equivalent. Yeah, top dressing of, yeah, exactly, rock on top. So it's still not a bad idea to put compost on top of it. I'm a huge believer in compost just because of that evapotranspiration. The idea here is that the water drains pretty quickly down. Your roots are going to go far down, but you're still going to get weeds. So if you have weed problems or you still, are having things that are more shallow rooted, compost is still, I just still think it's a great way, something to do. Any others?
I don't see any more questions. Somebody asked about commercial cactus mix in pots.
Okay, so we make our own conservatory mix. And so we're sort of we're sort of a soil snob. So our succulent mix is what we use for all of our potted plants because we have everything, our whole collection's in pots, except for our outdoor beds, which, so we think over 4,000 potted plants, and a lot of them are succulents. So our succulent mix we use for our leafy plants just because we have students watering, and a plant is so much more forgiving when you underwater it than overwatering it. If I remember this correctly, is we have about 60%, what am I thinking here, we have sand, pumice, and so we moved off of pumice to 3/5/8 lava rock. And then we have a little bit of redwood compost, but I could post that or I could email it to Leslie, get the exact formulation. But I hate most succulent mixes out there. You feel the bag. If you can't see it, you feel the bag and you feel absolutely no pumice, no red lava. It's not good. You want to usually cut it with pumice. More pumice, the better. But we use it's almost 60% inorganic is what we use in our succulent mix. And then for something that needs even more drainage, add more red lava or more pumice to get that drainage going. So even in our leafy plants, that's what we use. So.
And then somebody asked about removing dead leaves from succulents.
Yeah, I got a question the other day on Facebook as someone's like, Aeonium was growing in the lower leaves down below. Sure, you could remove them just like, you could remove the lower leaves on an aloe. It's just how much you want to get in there. It's not necessary. That's just the nature of how they're growing. If it's wet and it's holding a lot of moisture against the plant, that might be a good idea to remove because you don't want that moisture to be held against the stems, especially if there's any chance of them being injured and then having that moisture. So that's really up to you and how cleanly you want your garden to look. Yeah.
And then somebody else asked about fertilizing succulents.
Yeah, they don't need a lot. Everyone has their own fertilizing ritual. We water our potted plants, succulents, about once a week in the winter, if that, and maybe twice in the summer, and we fertigate. Our irrigation runs through it, and we use a mix of equal parts of calcium nitrate with a 4-18-38 and magnesium sulfate. So it's really hard to compare that to, but yeah, if you're having a looser draining soil with water running out fast, sometimes I feel like we're almost growing our succulents in hydroponics because some of them we're trying to grow just in pumice just to prevent rot. So it's almost like when we water, the fertilizer just comes right out. So it really depends on how often you want to fertilize, but for sure, I mean, they're going to need it if they're in pots. In the ground, I wouldn't even worry about it. In the ground, especially if you had compost, I wouldn't fertilize. That's just the way we do things and the way I do things with them. Yeah.
Great. Another question about redwood compost and its effect on the soil food web. I don't know if that's in your area of expertise.
Like, are they talking about using it in a soil, or you literally have redwood compost, like redwood material, like the debris? I'm not sure.
I don't know whether she's talking about using it as a mulch or whether incorporating into the soil. I'm not sure. Anna, if you want to ask, go ahead.
We use it in our potting soil.
I thought redwood chips or redwood compost was antibacterial, so it would affect the bacterial breakdown of the beneficial microorganisms in the soil food web.
Yeah, I think I would be more worried about the tannins if they were laying on the soil. We use it in our potting soil. Of course, I've never checked our soil for microorganisms, but it's a basis of most potting soils. So I would think if you had a healthier ecosystem and a healthy soil, that it wouldn't cause so many problems. But that's a good question. I should look into it.
No, that sounds good. If you've had no problems, that's fine then.
Yeah, no problems. Yeah. Of course, we
Somebody
always
asked,
wonder what we could do better. You know, there's always.
somebody else asked about Afterglow, and I'm not sure what Afterglow is.
It's an echeveria.
Okay. He says it's
Yeah.
not doing well while his other succulents are doing great on a sunny berm.
Oh yeah, I could see that one not being happy. That one's known for its really pretty color. That one's a little bit more sensitive. So I would say it's the sun. I would say that one is not meant for full sun. So it's a pretty one. It's probably losing its color.
So it needs a little shade.
A little shade. That's what I would think. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's all the written comments I have. If anybody else has a comment they want to ask, go right ahead. Question you want to ask? In that case, we will wrap it up, and thank you very much. It was
Thank you.
great.
I will leave now. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Nice talk.
Thanks.
And I guess we will thank you all for joining us tonight. And if you want to see a repeat of this or watch our website and join Western Hort, and you will get information about our next meeting also. So thank you. And I will say good night to all, unless anybody else has any